Okay, folks, good evening. Our Sunday class is for the time being switched to Sunday night instead of Sunday morning. I hope that's going to be okay with most people. We will see if it works out. Okay. Let us see here. All right. Okay, so there's a principle which is mentioned in the Talmud that states Hakol hoilech achar hachisum. Everything goes according to the ending, according to the close, according to the end. And that indeed is a valid principle, and it's an important principle as well. It's a principle which is relevant to many different things. Now, what does it mean? Essentially, is that even though things weren't good to begin with, and they may have been very challenging, and might have caused a lot of anguish even in the beginning, but all's well that ends well, as I think in the Shakespearean play, right? All's well that ends well. So that's one point of view. Everything that is decided really according to how it ends up. And very often that is in fact the case, that things start off in the dark and they end up in the light, so to speak. And we see that in fact in the creation, the whole process of creation. That's exactly how it works. Vahi erev vahi voiker yom echad. There was evening and there was morning one day. It starts off in the evening in the darkness, things start off in the darkness, and then eventually they graduate towards the light. And the light comes in. So, since the ending is in light, you would think that therefore the entire process, even though it began not so well, not such a perfect way, nevertheless the process is kind of justified because it ended up in the light, ended up in the positive column. You can see that in business as well. When a person opens a new business, generally he borrows money, he or she. They borrow money and they open a new business, and they're in the deficit for a period of time, in the red, until the money starts coming in, and then the sacrifice in the beginning was worth it, and the risk that people took was in the end worthwhile. So that's definitely one point of view, that things follow the ending. The Talmudic law, in fact, is talking about the certain blessings that we say during the prayers, during evening prayers, for example. And if you began with the wrong blessing, but you ended up with the right one, in other words, you concluded it in the right way, then it counts. But if the other way around, if you started off right, but you ended wrong, it doesn't count. You have to do it again. So, we see, therefore, that the end is primary. I'll explain this a little bit more according to Kabbalah soon. However, there is an opposing view, and this view is expressed by the Arizal, none other than Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the famous Kabbalist in Eitz Chaim, in his most famous work of all, Eitz Chaim. The Arizal says, "Hakol hoilech achar ha'aschola." Everything goes according to the beginning. Everything goes according to the beginning. Why does everything go according to the beginning? Because if the beginning is good, it almost ensures that the process will continue in the way that the trend will continue in the way that it started. If it started off well, it's bound to continue on that good path and get even better. Whereas if things start off badly, there's no guarantee that you're ever going to be able to get from negative into the positive column, from negative column into the positive column. Now, of course, it could happen. It could happen that things would change for the better. But there's less likelihood, one would think, than if one starts off well. If you start off with the right intentions and with the right foot forward, so to speak, then there's far more of a likelihood that the end will be the way it ought to be. So, which of these two approaches is in fact the more, which in fact is the primary approach? Is the primary approach that as long as the end is good, everything is good? Or is the approach supposed to be everything goes according to the beginning, and therefore we must put much more emphasis on the beginning? Now, why is this important? Obviously, the importance of this is because we're coming to, in the Jewish calendar anyway, we're coming to the end of the year. It's the last. We're in the last few days of the end of the year. Next week, in fact, is next week. This time is Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. So there won't be a class Sunday night, and there won't be a class Wednesday night either. But if we look at it, so we're coming to the end of the year now, and we have to try and figure out what's the most important thing. Is the end the most important thing, or is the beginning the most important thing? Now, obviously, you could come back and answer that, and this is actually correct, that you can't say that one is actually more important than the other. They're both equally important. It just happens to be where you are right now. Right? In other words, let's speak practically. If you're going to say that the end is more important when you're at the beginning of something, then you're not going to focus like you should do on making sure that the beginning is the way it should be. On the other hand, if you're at the beginning of something and say, well, it doesn't really matter now, when we get to the end, then I'll worry about it, that obviously ain't going to work too well either, right? So essentially, we have to say that both of these are, in a sense, equally important, but we have to emphasize and focus on where it is that we are now. So since we're at the end now and we come to the beginning only next week, now is the time to focus on the end. Now, in Kabbalistic terminology, everything goes after the end. Everything follows the end. In other words, the end really is the main thing. So this is called, in Kabbalistic terminology, this is called the concept of Or Choser. Or Choser, the light that returns. The light that returns. Why? Because when we talk about Or Yashar comes from above to below and illuminates everything in its path on the way until eventually it comes all the way to the end, to its destination. And once it's achieved its destination, and it's reached its destination and achieved what it had to achieve over there, and now the light sort of travels back. This is what happens at the end of the year. We discussed this a little bit last week, that when we come to the end of the year, the light that was the energy, the divine energy, which is called light in Kabbalistic terminology, the divine energy, the light, now returns back to its source. So that process of return, called Or Choser, is extremely powerful as it starts to leave the end, as it starts to return to its original source. Why? Because if you think about it like this, there's still the beam of energy coming down, the beam of light coming down, right? And now it's reflected off the surface that it's reflected off. In other words, it's leaving now the place where where the original destination was, and now it's returning. So you have really two forces working together at the same time. You have the light that is coming in and the light that is returning. All of it is concentrated sort of at the bottom. All of it is concentrated in the final moments of the year, in our particular case, and in the case that we're talking about here. All of it is concentrated in the last few days. The light that is coming down to enliven and give life to and give energy to these last few days is still coming down, but the light of the previous days, all the previous days of the year, is, so to speak, returning, and therefore you have a double portion of light, so to speak, and light always strengthens light. It doesn't cancel. They don't cancel each other out. At least in Kabbalistic terminology, perhaps in scientific experiments, it could be that they do in fact cancel each other out. There is such a phenomenon. I forget what it's called exactly. I can't remember right now. But in Kabbalah, it doesn't work that way. In Kabbalah, as the energy sort of reaches its final destination and begins to return, because there's a new light going to be coming in the new year. So that is a time which is of tremendous consequence and tremendous opportunity. I think, as I mentioned last time, that Hasidic thought has an analogy for this. The analogy is that the king he comes out of his palace, he's been on a journey, he's returning to the palace, and he returns to his palace through the fields. He returns to the palace through the fields. And as he goes through the fields, he comes out, the people come out to greet him, and they're sort of in their work clothes, and they're in their work mode. It's a time of work, it's daylight, they're busy working, they're in the fields, this is the place where they do their work. And the king is coming into the fields where they are, and sort of greeting them, smiling and happy, and so on and so forth. And as he goes back to his palace, so the people sort of follow in his wake, as is a common thing. Certainly in Talmudic ethics, if you want to call it that, in Jewish ethics in general, it is always a mitzvah, a good deed, a good thing. It's the right thing to accompany someone at least part of the way along the way. We in fact find this is based on a Torah principle that when a corpse, unfortunately, is found between two cities, and they don't know who he is, it's a stranger, they don't know how this person was died or was killed, so they measure to the two cities, and the city that it's closest to has the obligation to make sure that this person is given the proper burial that he deserves, he or she deserves. And also the sages have to go out and they have to do fulfill a commandment called the Egla Rufa. Egla Rufa is a procedure by which they exonerate themselves for not having accompanied this person to his destination, or at least sufficiently along the way that he would not have been in danger. So from there we learn that it's always a requirement to accompany people out of your house, for example, at least a few steps along the way. And if the person is a sage, if he's a great sage, you accompany him more than a few steps. Sometimes you will accompany him all the way home, right? And then go back to the place where you need to be. So similarly, when the king comes into the field and he's on his way now back to his palace, everyone sort of follows in his footstep, accompanying the king back to where it is that he's going. So he came out and now he's going back in. And that situation, the analogy, according to the Hasidic analogy, that situation is a situation of tremendous openness. It's a time of openness and a time of when the king is extremely approachable. When he's extremely approachable and one can ask anything. That's the time that we're talking about now, the time that we're talking about at the end of the year, when all the divine energy of the entire year is now starting to be recalled back to its original place, yet there's still light coming down to enliven the last few days of the year, because the Zohar says, Kol Yom V'Yom Avid Avidatei, every day does its duty. So the last day of the year has its duty, it's not finished yet. So the last days of the year are still coming in. Their energy, their divine permutation, what they're giving to the world hasn't yet dissipated, it hasn't yet been used, it hasn't gone through the system, so it's still coming down. And yet the light from the rest of the year, from all the previous days and weeks and months, is now starting to return to its original source. For, so to speak, if you want to call it this kind of recycling. The truth is, it's not really recycling, because it now comes back on a much higher level, as we explained, I think, last time. It comes back on a higher level every year, although it may not seem like that to us. Every year is nevertheless, in reality, a higher level. It's a higher form of light, a higher form of energy that never was before in creation. If anyone wants to see more on this, you can read chapter 14 of Igeret HaKodesh. Igeret HaKodesh is a part of Tanya. It's the fourth part of the famous work called Tanya. And you can see there, chapter 14, you can read more about it, and especially if you have the commentaries, you can find it on Chabad.org as well. If you want to look for it and read it with commentary, and there's classes on it. Rabbi Gordon has classes on it. There's many, many classes on this particular issue. So you can look them up there. But basically, therefore, the last days of the year are when we have this opportunity to elevate and to rectify everything that needs elevation and rectification in the last few days. There's a story told by the Baal Shem Tov, about the Baal Shem Tov, that he was very eager always to meet and greet those people whom he was aware of would be sort of close to him in the afterlife. As everybody knows, in the afterlife, in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, where the soul resides without its body, in other words, a certain level of spiritual bliss. So the Baal Shem Tov was always eager to meet those people who would sort of be his neighbors, so to speak, in Gan Eden. Many of them were, in fact, simple people, simple but extremely sincere people, as you'll hear from this following story. So he was told about one particular soul, a lofty soul, who, although he was basically an Am Haaretz, he was an ignoramus, he wasn't very learned and scholarly. Nevertheless, he was a very pure soul, a very pure person, and the Baal Shem Tov, when he heard about this person, wanted to meet him. So he went out, and this was just the last few days of the year, and he went to the person's inn. He was an innkeeper, as many people were in those days. And he sort of sat in the corner observing this innkeeper, for hours on end. He was observing him to try and learn from him what his merits were, like what was so special about this person, and what was it that he did that made him deserve such a holy spot in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. So he was observing, he was watching, and nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. Yes, he was an honest person and a very caring person, and so on and so forth, but he didn't really notice anything until the night before Rosh Hashanah, the night before the Jewish New Year. So the night before the Jewish New Year, when everyone had left the inn, and the Baal Shem Tov pretended to be sleeping in his corner, so the innkeeper takes out two ledgers, and he starts reading through the ledgers. One ledger is all of the bad things that happened to him right throughout the year, right? All the bad things that happened, the wine went sour, and the peasants came and they broke a few barrels of beer, and that kind of thing. All the things that went wrong, and he went through a whole list. It took him a while. Went through all the list day by day, everything that went wrong. And then he looked in the second ledger and started reading from the second ledger. And the second ledger was all the things that he had done wrong, right? What he had failed to do this on this day, and he failed to do that. And he forgot about this thing, and he forgot to do that thing, and so on and so forth. All these failures and the things that he had neglected or hadn't done fully with his full concentration and energy in terms of his spiritual, it's called avoiding, spiritual service to God. And he's reading through the whole ledger, and again, it's day by day, and he reads through all the things that he should have done and he didn't do, and so on and so forth. And he takes the two ledgers and he clasps them together, and then he puts a rope around them. And he says, God, you know, you've made sure that I paid back my dues. You know, the things that I did wrong, I had all kinds of incidents happen. And you know what? I got my complaints against you. You have your complaints against me. Let's call it quits. We're the best. We'll be the best of friends. And he takes the books bound together, the ledgers bound together, and throws them in the fire. And that was his vidui. That was his confession for the year. And then the Baal Shem Tov understood that the sincerity of this man, he wasn't a great scholar or anything, but he was incredibly sincere. And his sincerity was such that he spoke from the heart, and he spoke directly to his creator. This is what's happened to me. This is what I've done to you. Let's call it quits, and we'll start off tomorrow on a new footing. We'll start off the way things should be started off. So you see, when it comes to the end, we have the possibility of rectifying everything that we didn't manage to achieve yet. Now, is it possible always to rectify everything? It demands a tremendous amount of effort. Talmudic story, the story of Rebbe Elazar ben Dudaya, the famous, it's a very famous story in the Talmud. It is not a pleasant story, but it is a story that is told about this very, very wealthy man, Elazar ben Dudaya. I think I mentioned his story before here in these classes. In any event, he was a very, very wealthy man, but he also was a very big Baal Taivas, a very big, he was a lecher, let's put it that way, a lecher. In other words, he was a person who had this addiction to, a sexual addiction, let's put it that way. He had a sexual addiction. To the extent that every opportunity that he could find to be with a woman of ill repute or prostitute or whatever, he made sure that he took that opportunity and used it to the full. And so it happened that, of course, he got further and further away from what he was supposed to be doing in his life. He got further and further away from any spiritual quest. His only quest was to fulfill his passions, his physical passions. That's all he was interested in. It became an addiction, like most addicts. That's their desires to fulfill. And the truth is, I'll speak about addiction in a minute. It's not so simple, but that was his addiction. In any event, the story is told in the Talmud that one day he heard about a lady who he had not used her services ever before. He hadn't tried her out, so he decided he was going to go. He lived on an island far away. And he had to get a boat and sail off to meet this lady. And he went to the island and he introduced himself and so on and so forth. And she invited him as preparation, sit down for a meal. She cooked him a meal, and he sat and he ate. And he was a good cook, obviously. And he had a good meal and with wine and this and that and the other. And then at the end of the meal, he burped, as some people do. And she laughed and she said, just as that burp will never get back to where it came from, so you too, you're never going to get back to where you came from. You're done. You're toast, right? You're finished. And suddenly, like, it sort of hit him in the gut, he realized that that's true. How am I ever going to find my way back? This is, in other words, he's gone beyond the point of no return. And that suddenly hit him in the gut, and he realized that he better do something fast. But he didn't know what to do. It was too late already. It was beyond the point of no return. Anyway, he ran out of there, went back to his city, or went back to the nearest city and found the Jewish section of the city, went into a synagogue, opened up the ark, and put his head into the ark and wept and wept and wept and wept and wept and wept until he died. One of the great sages said about him, happy is the man who can acquire his world in 1 hour. In other words, in a short time. Most of us have to work for our world, in other words, for the world to come, for the spiritual place that we're going to find ourselves in the afterlife. We have to work hard for that. Some people manage to acquire it in just a moment. In just a moment of tremendous, tremendous repentance and return and feeling of, I blew it and I'm really upset about blowing it all these years. And his repentance was accepted. His tshuva, his return was accepted. Let's not call it repentance, let's call it return. His return was accepted. It was accepted on high. It all depends on the efforts. It depends on the sincerity. It depends on the intention. And he was accepted. So when it comes to the end of the year, we could always say, in this particular aspect, in that aspect, another aspect, it's beyond the point. There is no point even trying. I'm giving up. I'm going to give up. And many people do that. Unfortunately, it's true that many people do that. They kind of give up. I'm beyond the point of no return, and therefore, it's all over. But it's not all over. As long as you're alive, it's not all over. It ain't all over till it's all over. Yogi Berra, right? It ain't all over till it's all over. That is a very true statement, and one that should give us pause, and we should start thinking about it. It's not all over till it's all over. The year, we still have a few days left. We still have time left. Now, does that mean that one has to be in a state of moroseness, in a state of sadness? No, on the contrary, it should be in a state of joy. Knowing that I have the opportunity now to clean things up, even though I made a big mess of things up until now, I have the opportunity right now to clean things up. And that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to do my best. I can't maybe clean it up totally right now, but I'll do my very best. Another story about the Baal Shem Tov, about another person that the Baal Shem Tov realized was of very high stature. He was a cantor. A cantor means too many people think they're too old to change, right? Right, that's exactly true. So this is the cantor. A cantor is someone who sort of sings the services, particularly during the high holy days, during the Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and so on and so forth. A cantor, or a chazan, as it's called in Hebrew. So the Baal Shem Tov learned that this chazan was also a very lofty soul, and he wanted to find out what it was that what was so special about him. And he had this very weird reputation of singing all of the, particularly on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the Jewish New Year and the Day of Atonement, are very, very solemn days. They're not necessarily days of sadness, not like Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the destruction of the temples, but they're very solemn. About these days, it says, Gil'u bir'ada, rejoice in trembling, right? In other words, trembling with awe, but it's a time of rejoicing nevertheless. So he, nevertheless, had this strange custom of singing all of the prayers on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, particularly the Al-Chait, when a person thinks about all the, the sinful acts that he was involved in. Al-Chait, it's called Al-Chait, when you say, for the sin that, I did this, I did that, and you try and recall all of the things that you did incorrectly, whatever. So he would sing that out. All right, he would sing, and it was sort of a happy tune. So people were very upset with him. Why is he singing this to a happy tune? But the Baal Shem Tov heard that this was, very special. He realized he was a very special person, and that he had a bright future after 120 years. But he had a bright future. And so he went to visit him, and he asked him about his custom of singing the vidui, right? Singing these psalms and the verses where we talk about our sinful activities. So he says, look, I'm a simple person. My job is to clean the king's palace, right? I have to shovel out the what do you call it? The offal? O-F-F-A-L. Yeah, the offal. That's what I have to shovel out. I don't want to use other words. You probably know what I'm talking about. When you have to clean the chicken droppings out of the cage, the bird droppings out of the cage or whatever it is, right? So that's basically what we're talking about. You have to clean out all the droppings and all the schmutz, all the dirt and all the mess and everything. It has to be cleaned out. So it's a disgusting job, it's true. But since I'm doing it for the king, or to bring the people in a cleansed state, in a purified state before the king, so I'm happy to do it. It's a great job, right? And therefore, since I'm happy about it, I sing. And that's really the attitude that we should have right at the end of the year. This is not an attitude of, oh no, everything's sort of piled up on my head, and I have this cloud, and it's raining on me, this dark cloud of moroseness and depression and anxiety. And people walk around like that. Unfortunately, it's true. But the whole point is not that. The whole point is we have an opportunity right now. We have an opportunity to change things. It's much easier to change things when you're in a state of joy, of excitement, of anticipation, rather than in a state of anxiety and worry and fear and fear of consequences and punishments and all kinds of things like that. No, we're going to set everything right. Everything's going to work out. It's all, we're taking the two ledgers. This is what happened to me during the year. That's what I did. You're all wrong during the year. We're wrapping them together, throwing them in the fire. They're gone. We're starting all over. We're starting all over. And therefore, it's a tremendous opportunity to be in a state of constant joy these last few days of the year. And that will lead into a good beginning. How do you make sure that the beginning is good? By making sure that the end is good before. I've said it here before in these classes. It's impossible to start off a day on a positive note if going to bed the night before was on a negative note. You have to go to bed on a positive note also, so that you can get up in the morning on a positive note. As I mentioned the analogy, a dog, in order to make its bed comfortable, just chases its tail around a few times and it flops down, and that's how it goes to sleep. Well, if we do the same thing, just chasing your tail around before you go to sleep, you can imagine what you're going to wake up in the morning, basically a dog, right? Just like a dog wakes up in the morning, he went to sleep a dog, he wakes up a dog. So the same thing, chasing your tail around at night before you go to sleep is not going to make you suddenly into a head in the morning. You'll still remain a tail and chasing your tail in the morning. That's the problem. The solution is don't chase your tail at night. Think about positive things. Think about all the good things that have happened during the day. You might want to review your day. It's a very good thing. I try and do that every night, although I must admit that sometimes I don't manage to do it. But if you review your day, at the end of the day, you review your day, and you review your day in the following way. There were things that I could have done better, and I'm resolving right now that next time this opportunity presents itself, I'm going to do that in the right way, right? I yelled at my kids, or I yelled at the wife, or I yelled at my husband, or whatever it is, and okay, I was a little bit upset. Next time I'm going to contain myself. I'm going to think about it beforehand, and I'm going to keep calm. And so on and so forth. And there's many, many things that we can do at the end of the day. We can resolve that tomorrow is going to be better than today. Not sitting there, again, being rained upon by this dark cloud of moroseness and sadness and anxiety and so on and so forth. No, just noticing what needs fixing and then fixing it. Resolving to fix it now. And it could be that I'll fall again. Next time I'll make a mistake again. But if I keep on reminding myself every time, I remind myself, so that the mistakes will become fewer and further between. And eventually we'll get into the habit of not doing them. Habits take a long time to get rid of. They also take a long time to make. And if one makes the effort to make one's habits good, but particularly at night, you'll find them so much easier to start off the next day. And that's one of the suggestions that I would like to offer, that make sure that the night before, make sure that the end is good, and then the beginning, the next day, is certainly going to be better. And comes to the end of the year, make sure that the end is good. You resolve to fix this and this and this and this. And despite the fact that you messed up the whole year, it's time to change things now, time to improve things. And we are, oops, sorry, too many phone calls going on. Okay, there we go. Okay, so basically that's the message. Any questions?